As promised.
Does that mean we're on, Gretch? Okay, well, it's a minute early. Let's give it one more minute. There are several people who said they were coming and might come in time. I'm assuming this clock is correct, of course.
It is twice a day anyway.
Yep, I'm 159. There we go. Okay, let us start, Philip. My name is George Brown. I'm a member of the resident council, and for the past several months, I think you all know that the resident council has instituted a bi-monthly exchange called Council Conversations, in which we have an informal interview with the leading staff of Woodland Pond and sometimes the leading heads of the various committees of Woodland Pond. And today we are delighted to have Philip Nail with us. Philip is the Director of Long-Term Care. He's the man in charge, the man with the plan at the health center. And perhaps not as well known to some of us in independent living as you should be. So this is an opportunity to hear from Philip and not from me about who you are, what you're doing, and how you are braving this quite daunting and amazing time we've all had for the past 18, 19 months now. It seems like forever. We've never had anything but the pandemic, but there was a time that this place existed before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Philip, let's start with your little bit of your background, who you are, what kind of training did you get to this job, and how did it bring you to Woodland Pond?
Well, sure. And thank you, George. And it's nice to have this opportunity to speak with folks that reside here in independent living. You're right. Our paths don't often cross. So I am always happy and eager to talk about the things that we're up to and what our goals and what we're trying to accomplish. To answer your question a little bit about myself, I am the son of two Lutheran ministers, my mother and father, and who are, they say they're retired, but they still try to continue to do their ministry at every opportunity that they have. I myself did not go into the ministry, but I felt called to the field of social work. You know, and some could say that's kind of a secular form of ministry that I felt very strongly about. I actually attended an art school, the famous performing arts school in Manhattan, the Fame School, movies and such, and did some acting and some singing professionally. Enjoyed that. But when it was time to become a grown-up, that didn't appeal to me so much. And so it wasn't so much a matter of thinking about what else I wanted to do. I knew the only thing that I wanted to do, and that was to go into social work. I wanted to be a part of contributing to society, and whatever that meant, not in some grandiose, egotistical way, but trying to just be a part of spreading some sort of hope and constructive optimism for people. And that's very important for me, and I think very important for all of us, regardless of what profession that we have. So I did my undergraduate training at NYU, which was heavy in the clinical field. And I did my graduate training at Columbia, where I combined a program of clinical social work with systems management. And my first job right out of school down in New York City was in an acute care hospital where I was the trauma social worker. And so my initial jobs were going to the various emergency rooms that participated in Catholic Medical Center back in those times, and working with victims of child abuse, of rape, gunshot wounds, other sorts of violence and trauma.
Wow.
Obviously challenging work, fulfilling nonetheless, but I started to realize I wanted to have a relationship with the people I worked with that lasted longer than those couple hours I may have spent with them in the emergency room. And that really led me into long-term care. And so after a few more years doing hospital social work, I took my first job as a staff social worker in a nursing home in Brooklyn, Bishop McGovero, and I loved it. I loved working with a group of professionals, but centered around a community and helping to enhance the lives and forward the direction that people chose for themselves. Self-determination is a driving principle that brought me into the field and remains my driving philosophy today, is to continue to do our best to allow the people we work with call their own shots and drive their own bus. So I then became a director of social work throughout the years, and worked at a couple facilities in that capacity. And it was about that time I was then married to my wife, and we had our first child, and we decided it was time to move out of New York City. I was actually born in Kingston, but most of my formative years were in New York City. But we had some roots and familiarity with Kingston, and decided that was the atmosphere in which we wanted to raise our first child. And so we moved up to the Hudson Valley again. And I started working at a facility in the Catskills as the director of social work. And as I became more immersed in the field, I don't know how to put this another way, but I was watching management run a facility and thinking, oh gosh, that's a mistake. Oh gosh, there's better ways I think that we could be doing this or that. And that really the whole idea of working in systems, when primarily I had worked with individuals, families, and groups, became very, very appealing to me. Just seeing how systems could affect a larger swath of people and putting together sturdy methods and methodology in which care and support could be given was very fulfilling to me, remains very fulfilling to me. And with some encouragement from some very close friends and colleagues, I pursued my nursing home administrator's license and became a nursing home administrator. It's about that same time I also joined a group called Leading Age New York, which is an advocacy and support group for nonprofit long-term care facilities, and I remain a consultant with them to this day. And so was the administrator up at this facility in the Catskills for some time. It was a member facility, as Woodland Pond was, of Health Alliance. And there were some changes in management over the years, which some of the longer termers here will be familiar with when Westchester Medical Center took over, that disenchanted me a little bit with how things were going. And it was at that time that Michelle, with whom I had a tangential relationship. I had come down to Woodland Pond a couple times to do some consulting and to help them set up some systems and such. And I'm happy to say that I'm flattered to say that Michelle remembered me as such. And it just turns out that in a time when I was becoming less happy with the circumstances I was in, I also became very ill. I had an undiagnosed case of meningitis that went on for quite some time before I got proper help. And there was a time I actually thought I was going to have to go on disability. And I remember being in my hospital bed, and this chokes me up to this day. I'm not ashamed to show that. Michelle called me at my hospital bed and said, no matter what happens, you will always have a place here at Woodland Pond.
Wow.
And so things serendipitously happened at the same time. You can call meningitis serendipitous, I guess. But at a time when I was least certain about my current circumstances, Michelle had offered me a landing place, and we continued to talk. And I happily accepted her offer to be the director of long-term care here at Woodland Pond. And that's going on about 6 years ago now.
6 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so what that means, the director of long-term care, is I am both the licensed nursing home administrator of record, which is required by New York State for the nursing home portion of the health center, but also in charge of the operations of the assisted living portion, which includes Garden View and assisted living. Michelle and I have shared and helped each other develop common goals, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, that takes care for the first 10 questions I had of you.
Uh-oh.
Thank you, Philip. That was marvelous. That was marvelous. You have so many different strains. I happen to pick up singing. Maybe we can get you to come up here and sing some songs. Not now, though. So that was a very happy landing for you from your meningitis here. And 6 years ago, things were different than they are now. So 18 months, 19 months ago, something strange happened. And you, especially in the healthcare unit, had to adopt drastically to the COVID pandemic. And we all did, but you especially, because it was hardest on you and your team, and of course the residents there. And there are different phases to that. There is, of course, the immediate period of lockdown before we had the vaccine. Then there was the period when we all got the vaccine. Then there was a period of relative tranquility when we thought something was good would happen. Then along came the Delta variant, and things are now back in a not so certain and not so happy era. Can you, not to want to walk through every stage of that, but just pick out some of the most crucial challenges you had to face in that period?
Well, that's actually an excellent summary of pretty much how that went down, George. I appreciate that. Sure. Healthcare itself, and boy, this could go on for hours, and I'll try not to do that, is a challenging field in our country to begin with, under the best of circumstances. It's largely in our country a proprietary system, lots of individual players, each with different stakes in the game, and so that already makes the coordination of care difficult. So add to that an unprecedented in any of our lifetimes, pretty much a pandemic. So some of the biggest challenges, well, there were many. One was the exacerbation of some of the strains that already exist in healthcare. I mean, none of us are strangers to reading in the newspaper, hearing on the news about shortages in healthcare staffing. That is epidemic. It's not just in our county or our state, it's throughout our country. The regulations that exist in healthcare are tremendous, particularly on the skilled nursing level. It's been said that there's only one industry that's more highly regulated, and that's that of nuclear power plants. I guess if you had to pick one, that's one you'd want to be higher regulated. But there's lots of onerous factors, and we have a system in which regulations are built upon the performance of the worst performing of the facilities. So if facility A in Cairo, New York, has a terrible outcome, there is a rash of onerous regulations upon which we all have to adhere to. So it's difficult in the best of times to keep up with the regulations as they change, to be able to meet them in light of challenges to funding and challenges to staffing. And then we have a pandemic in which literally, this is not hyperbole, every single day, often 7 or 8 o'clock at night, the Department of Health would drop a new all-encompassing regulation.
And then they would send around teams to inspect you without any notice.
They certainly did. So on top of the normal surveys that we had, the regular ones, there were infection control surveys. And so keeping up with vast changes in regulation that were happening, at least in the beginning, almost daily, the expectation that we meet them immediately with no increase in resources for the most part, and then be surveyed by Department of Health regulatory teams has put tremendous strain on an already strained system. Throughout the country, numerous people have left the field, simply burning out, leaving fields that they have loved for quite some time because it just became so challenging and difficult. Part of what's mitigated that here at Woodland Pond is I would say twofold. One has been, and this has been very important to me, is the commitment from the day I started, and with tremendous support, the commitment to workplace culture. Of course, our residents are of our paramount interest and focus, but any healthcare facility that neglects the experience of their healthcare workers does so at their peril. If you don't have happy, supported, fulfilled healthcare workers, you cannot produce quality outcomes for your residents. They must go hand in hand. And so the commitment that we have here, that Michelle has backed with resources, with energy, with creativity, has been tremendous. And it's allowed us to do far better than most facilities in terms of retaining staff, recruiting staff, and adjusting to the ever-changing regulations that have come forth. We are in constant contact with each other, often into the evening, brainstorming, tapping people who may not have otherwise been involved in a certain area of the health center, but now we've asked them to be because we need them to be right now. And the response from staff from all over Woodland Pond has been tremendous. So it still remains an absolute challenge, but I am grateful and appreciative that we are faring better than just about any other facility. And you can take that with a grain of salt because I'm sitting here representing those people. But in terms of our staffing and outcomes, it's because of the cooperation and the commitment from leadership and line staff here that's helped us to do as well as we have.
I think we're all deeply appreciative of this, of the staff, even though we may not see them as much as we see the staff on the independent living side, because your numbers of your non-infection rate has been extraordinary throughout this whole time and has beaten the other institutions in our similar institutions.
Yeah, you had mentioned those infection control surveys. Our health center had 6 of them. And through all 6, we did not receive one deficiency.
That's amazing.
And they just pop in. There's no advance warning. Kelly at the reception desk will give me a call and say, Department of Health is here. And off we go. So, yeah.
And yet you have still, well, with the Delta variant, we all have another challenge coming on since the summer. And now the government, the state government and the federal government have now mandated vaccines for all health workers. And this is a challenge for Woodland Pond and for every other health center because there are still not insignificant numbers of people who are hesitant or resistant. And Michelle has recently showed us the numbers that are very positive in terms of the percentage of vaccinated staff gone shooting up in the past 2 months. But still, there's a deadline ahead of you next week.
Mhm.
Do you want to comment a little bit on the challenge you're facing?
Sure. And this has put across the whole industry, this has put a tremendous strain and forced facilities really to have to make, well, and individuals to have to make very tough choices. I will openly say I have two minds. Philip Mayle, the non-administrator, feels very strongly about the mandate. I'm not ashamed to say that. I believe that in healthcare, it should be mandatory. Philip Mayle, the person that has to staff a health center, has felt the impact of that because it's probably semantics, but individuals are not mandated to take the vaccine. You are mandated to take it if you choose to work in a field that receives money from the federal government. And guess what? We do, from the state and federal government. And so if you're choosing to remain in that field and accept monies, then yes, you must get a vaccine. So I think that's an important distinction. No one is being forced to do something against their will. They have the option to no longer work in healthcare. And there are some individuals that are choosing that options for reasons, some I can relate to and some I can't. I'm just going to be very honest. But that's a choice they get to make nonetheless. Having said that, the amount of education, support, and yes, good old-fashioned incentives that we have offered here at Woodland Pond, again, from a CEO who has not been shy about putting forth every bit of resource necessary to accomplish our goals. Our vaccination rate, once again, and this is discoverable information, is far higher than the average facility. And the mandate kicks in Monday. And even in the last several days, we have had some folks who realize they want to work here. If they're committed to healthcare and they have to make a choice between working somewhere else or staying in the field that they studied and received their certifications or degrees in, this is the place they want to do it. And so the fact that the number of folks who are deciding not to get the vaccine and leaving has shrunk with every given day. It's still going to pose a challenge. We were not full staff to begin with. There's not a facility in the universe, as far as I know, that is full staff to begin with. And we're going to have some trying times, but I can tell you where the sausage is made. We had 3 interviews today. We believe we've hired 3 more today. We hired
Fantastic.
1 more yesterday. I think I have those numbers right. And it's just one person at a time, one CNA at a time, one LPN at a time. And the incentives that we're putting forth have been helpful in that regard. And I will add one more thing, George. I know I talk quite a bit. Some of our best employees are the ones who left and then came back because they thought they had it rough. And then they went to work at Golden Hill or Pembroke Commons or Ferncliff and said, oh my God, the support, the staffing levels, the resources at Woodland Pond have exceeded their, and come back happy as a clam. And those are my favorite experiences to hear about.
I did not know that story, but it's perfectly understandable because you and Michelle and the leadership team just radiate so much support to all the staff and the residents that I think that's why we all stay here. We have a different perspective, perhaps, but yes, and I think it's an enormous credit to you and to Michelle and to all this leading staff that this is the case. I had one more set of questions, and then I thought I'd open it up to the people of the floor. For those on television, you should know that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 12 visitors, attendees at this, live attendees. I don't think you can be seen on the screen, but if we do have questions, and think about them when I finally ask Philip the last question, then maybe you could come up and use the microphone here. So my last question is, what do you do for fun and leisure when you're not at Woodland Pond? sounds like you don't have any time. You're not in Woodland Park.
Let me think back to those times. Well, it's actually fun to even talk about fun things. I still enjoy singing. I have sung in Carnegie Hall with a group several times.
Wow.
I enjoy music very much. My oldest daughter just graduated with a degree in musicology. I have two children, by the way, two daughters. I have a husband who's been so supportive, even though I've been missing in action for many a day during this period. Yeah, music, spending time. I enjoy travel. That's been a little harder at this time.
You also have dogs.
I have a dog. You've probably all seen Nolly. There is no one more enthusiastic to come to work than, in fact, he sometimes is inspirational to me, saying, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you want to go in today?" And he's very disappointed when I don't bring him. But I used to play quite a bit of tennis. I was in the 18s division way back when I was 18. I was a city ranked junior. So I enjoy that very much. I think I said travel also. And a recent, and this is a pandemic induced pastime because none of us can go places as we used to for a while. I have become an absolute junkie of classic movies and TV. And so I've started collecting memorabilia, and I even went to a convention where I am proud to say I have an autograph photo with Wally and the Beaver from Leave It to Beaver, and of William Shatner from Star Trek. So I've been enjoying exploring things like that.
I think I read that William Shatner just hit 100, or is it out to hit
90?
100?
He hit 90, yep. And I saw him leap out of that Lexus SUV when he arrived on the site.
Wow.
And looks like he's got another 100 years to go.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you're doing a few things somehow.
Yes.
That's amazing. Well, thank you very, very much, Philip. That was sort of a tour d'horizon. I'm sure we could, as you say, go into much greater detail, but perhaps we should ask anyone amongst this assembled multitude that has a question or a comment to come forth now. Jakob. Yeah, come up here so people can see you.
Oh, impressive medal. I mean, Philip, we'll call him. Having been involved in the medical field from a physics perspective, I'm a medical physicist, but I worked in hospital for close to 40 years. I know a little bit about regulations, and you mentioned the regulations that healthcare is heavily regulated, particularly nursing homes and so on. Do you have any thoughts about the benefit of having those regulations? Because the regulations are hard, they're hard to comply, it's a nuisance and so on, but there is probably a good reason and there is some benefit to having them. I, for instance, would much rather prefer to fly on a regulated airplane than in an unregulated one.
Sure. That's a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up because it is an involved discussion, and by no means am I anti-regulation. I just flew back up. I was bringing my mother back up from Florida, and I'm very glad to have the FAA and the Food and Drug Administration and all those important necessary government services. What becomes particularly complex with long-term care regulation, and that's an important distinction you brought up, is correctly so. Long-term care, as opposed to maybe a hospital setting, has quite a few more regulations that focus on quality of life because people reside here. And those are extremely important. What becomes challenging is there's often a conflict in the regulations themselves. So we are, and this is broadly speaking, we are to afford residents, which I am fully in support of, as much freedom and independence and right to choose as possible. I'm all for it. At the same time, there are regulations that are punitive if we have negative outcomes. So for instance, if George here was in our charge and George could not transfer safely to get out of his bed into a chair.
It happens.
Happens to the best of us. We may try to exercise some safety measures to keep George from doing that. But George says, leave me alone. I want to be able to do this. George falls on the floor. Hope that never happens. George sustains an injury. The facility then is cited for the injury. So there's often conflicts in allowing the independence that people want and should have, and then the outcomes of those. Another one is, let's say, dietary issues. People should be able to eat whatever they want. We should educate folks on what we feel is best. But if we have someone who then eats whatever they want and then ends up with some sort of severe medical outcome, we are liable to then be deficient and receive some very serious sort of citations if there isn't a good thread of documentation and a good thread of efforts being made. So there's often those are just two kind of oversimplified examples, but it's the conflict sometimes of allowing people to live their best life, but yet never experience a bad outcome.
And it's played out most dramatically right now with the vaccine issue. You mentioned you just came up from Florida. So what the state of Florida is doing compared to what the state of New York is doing is dramatic. And the result is a lot of dead Floridians.
Yeah. 1 in every 400.
And it is appalling, but they claim this is individual freedom and liberty.
Yep. Perfect example, George. Yep.
They're free to kill themselves and those loved ones around them. So we're battling against that. But then, as you talked about earlier, we still have individuals here who want to maintain their freedom not to get vaccinated, and it's an issue. Any other questions? Yes, Carl.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful interview. My question is slightly in a different direction, but we're all, we hope, someday going to move to the side of the building where you reside. Could you say a little bit about the process of how decisions are made and what is your part in it, and how do we go about moving over there?
Great question. Yes. First, my own personal philosophy, and that which I instill in my staff to help us be sensitive to those major changes that can happen, is to accept without taking any kind of personal slight that nobody wants to be there. No one goes through life saying, I can hardly wait till that day I get in a nursing home. That's just not how it goes. And yet here we are working in a field in which when that time happens, it means something went wrong. There was an injury, there was an illness, and people enter not at their best. They don't feel well. They are now at threat of losing some sense of identity or independence that they had before. Our wonderful children may start quarreling with each other. We promised this would never happen. What about the finances? So all those are real life, very human types of dynamics that can occur. So having said that overview, it is our absolute mission at Woodland Pond to make the transition as well as the future as stimulating and fulfilling as possible. Again, I mentioned I was touring my mother around. She's in the process of making this very difficult decision. And what I told her is, and what I told my dad is, you don't come here to wait to die. You come to the health center because you need help to figure out how to still live. And it's that overarching philosophy that my staff will tell you, I will say, find a way to get to yes. If someone wants to still engage in something and do something, find a way to get to yes. How can we make that happen, given the physical limitations, given the regulations, given all of that? So that's kind of an overview. At Woodland Pond, with the numerous levels of care we have here, independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing, we have some options here that are afforded, that you all made the very good choice of living in a CCRC. We have a weekly meeting where representatives, including Michelle, from independent and from all levels of care in the health center are present. And what we talk about is all of you. So what that means, in the best of ways, we talk about you. If we know someone is struggling, if we know Mrs. Jones is headed out for knee surgery, if we know Mr. Smith has fallen 4 times in independent living in the last month, yes, you hit our radar. Not so we can paternalistically tell you what you have to do, but to figure out, given the resources that we have here at Woodland Pond, how can we best support you? So given that exercise of thought that involves you, not us talking just about you, but engaging with you, here's what we see. Do we identify the problem the same way? And how can we overcome it? We come to decisions collectively. So if there's a decision made where someone has to move to a different level of care, we talk to you, we talk to your family if that's applicable and desirable by you. Some people don't want their family to have anything to do with it. That's you driving the bus again. You get to make those decisions. And then we talk about the resources available. And if it's something that makes sense, if it's something that sounds like is workable, and if it's something whereby safety can be maintained, we will go about initiating. There's certain paperwork that is required in New York State when one moves from an independent living setting to one of the settings in the health center. We will help arrange to have those done by a medical professional, those forms and those. So we in the health center know what kind of medical needs are there, what kind of medications are necessary, what kind of treatment is necessary. We will guide you through that process and obtain all of those resources with you and for you so that the transition is seamless as possible.
Wow, great response to a great question. That is really something that we don't think about, at least I don't think about enough. But that's why we're here. We're here to have that available to us. We're probably running out of time, but I'm sure we got in time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anybody back there? Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Heather Green, and I'm the administrator in training here. Yes, thanks. And Philip is my preceptor here. I also was blessed to be able to work under him when he was at Mountainside Residential Care Center in Margaretville as the administrator. So my question for you, Philip, is, and it may be an impossible question, but but
I have the power to grant your certification.
I know,
Heather.
I'm risking a lot here. I'm risking a lot. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the future of nursing home care in this state. Let's stay with the state. Thanks.
Wow, what a great
That
question.
sounds like a 2-hour question.
Yep, we better order pizza, everyone.
Yeah.
What is it going to look like? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure, and that's we are not going back to business as usual. We are forever changed as a country, and certainly forever changed in our delivering of healthcare. There are going to be facets of, and this is not necessarily a bad thing at all, getting back to your very good question, multi-layered questions about, good regulations, useful ones. I think there are going to be new built-in expectations and regulations regarding infection control. Again, not to get too broad here, but as we're in a world of climate change and we're in a world of uber nationalism, that we are going to be seeing more critters and bugs and risks for pandemics and infections than we have ever seen before. We as a system are going to have to be more agile and adept to responding to that. A lot of what we've had to do in this pandemic is form pandemic emergency systems and policies. They are now in place. And the expectation will be that we continue to keep the systems that we've built up robust and active, and not put them back away in a closet for the next pandemic. So in terms of our infection control practices, in terms of our resources, in terms of stockpiles of protective personal equipment, and in terms of our relationship with the county, with the CDC, all these kind of open lines that exist right now where we get information and we give it back, telling them how we're doing, what we need. I think those things are going to remain up and active.
Wow, well, I think that might be a good finale to this wonderful conversation, at least in my view. I think we've all learned how fortunate we are to have Philip in charge of our healthcare here. And we hope we can each do our part to entice you to stay and be happy and to sing and to do all the things you like to do. And so on that note, I think we shall bring it to an end. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.